name's Victoria Carter, and my project was called Our Health Messages: A Shot in the Dark: Impact of Source Credibility, Framing, and Self Efficacy on College Students' Perceptions of Health Messages. I based my study off of a study done by Block and Keller in 1995 to study intentions to get a flu shot by college students after receiving a multitude of different types of health messages. So I used source credibility, which was operationalized as trustworthiness and expertise on a given topic as perceived by an individual of the source. Framing was the positive and negative portrayal of consequences for getting or not getting a flu shot. And I used protection motivation theory throughout the whole thing and its different components of self-efficacy and response efficacy and vulnerability and severity. And the way the literature sets up this theory is that you go through a threat appraisal process of how severe you think the risk is to you and how vulnerable you are to getting it, so the flu, how likely you are to get sick. And then you move into a coping appraisal of self-efficacy: can I get a flu shot, can I fulfill the recommendations, and response efficacy of will this flu shot actually reduce my risk. So these led to my research questions of what factors influence intentions to get a flu shot, and what factors will increase perceived severity and vulnerability to move through the threat appraisal to the coping appraisals. My hypotheses were that any type of message with any type of risk would increase intention to get a flu shot, whether it be high or low self-efficacy or positive or negative framing. And I hypothesized that the negatively framed low efficacy message would be perceived by that cell to be more risky than the positively framed high self-efficacy, so meaning the people would still think that getting a flu shot was risky and they'd still get sick. I used a convenient sample of 339 undergraduate students from communication classes, and I chose to use college students because of their unique social and living situation. We all saw a few years ago when H1N1 broke out, it really affected college campuses, so I decided to look at flu shots just within that setting. The mean age of my participants was just over 20 years old, and 84.7% were female and 15.3% were male, which is pretty standard in the communication breakdown. So first they completed a pretest, which used 7-point Likert type scales to gauge their knowledge of the flu, both individually and compared to others, and their shot likelihood, so on a scale of 1 to 7, how likely they were at that point in time to get a flu shot. They then completed Gould's Health Consciousness Index scale. It's previously validated in 1988 and had an alpha of 9.911 to evaluate how alert they are to their health throughout the day or week, how much they monitor, and how aware they are of changes in it. They are then randomly assigned to one of 4 experimental groups. Each had a cell size of 83 to 87 and received a different message created by the researcher. All messages came from the University of Georgia Health Center and fit into one of the cells of the 2x2 factorial design of high and low self-efficacy and positive negative framing. The messages were exactly the same except for the wording of the percent. It was either 80% or 20%, or risk was increased or decreased. Everything else was equal. After viewing the stimulus, they moved on to their post-test, which was a little lengthy, but it started with McCroskey's Credibility Index, which was from 1966 and had an alpha of 0.843. It was a series of semantic differential scales to gauge how credible they felt the University Health Center was, and they perceived it to be extremely credible, very informed, so no results were determined to be based off of the credibility. There's then a series of manipulation checks where they were asked to identify in a multiple choice what percent was used in their flyer, as well as if a statement of a 20% reduced risk was present in their flyer. They then used a comprehension index that had an alpha of 0.835 to describe how easy the message was to follow and how easy it was to comprehend, which showed they understood what was happening in the flyer and in the message so that our results would be valid. Again, they were asked their likelihood to get the shot after viewing the stimulus, and then how vulnerable they felt on a scale of 1 to 100 of percent they thought they were likely to get the flu. And finally, they completed a severity index that had an alpha of 0.85, which used 3 7-point Likert type scales to evaluate the severity, if it was frightening, dangerous, or severe, how they felt about the flu. And then it wrapped up with covariates of if they've had the flu, if a friend had the flu, and if they've got a flu shot before, and a few demographic questions on age, gender, and if someone in their family worked in the medical field. So the results, it turned out that 68.1% of participants believed they'd had the flu in the last 6 months, which was surprising because it was over the summer, not flu season. But 63.1% had received a flu shot in a previous year. Our manipulation checks were proven successful by chi-squared tests. All cells correctly identified the percentage of risk stated and the presence or absence of that verbatim fact at a statistically significant level. Hypothesis number 1, that the likelihood to get a flu shot would increase after viewing any stimulus, was proven wrong. It actually decreased from, on a 7-point scale, 4.12 to 4.0, even though the t-test results for that were not statistically significant. This may be due to a couple things. Research shows that adherence to a current behavior or lack of a current behavior can be stronger than any informational or educational message. So the group of 112 students that had never gotten a flu shot may have actually decreased their chance of likelihood or helped maintain that level of likelihood to get a flu shot. Or it could have been due to the time between the pre-test and the post-test. Like I said, a lot of researchers believe you have to move from the threat appraisal stage to the coping appraisal stage. And because they're immediately asked to go from pre-test to stimulated post-test, that's movement, the time for movement in stages might not have been there. Hypothesis number 2, that the negatively framed low efficacy cell would perceive getting the flu shot to be more risky than the high efficacy positively framed shot, was proven statistically significant by an ANOVA showing main effects, as well as the positively framed low efficacy cell perceived getting a flu shot to be riskier than the positively framed high efficacy cell, which shows the importance of self-efficacy in messages, even if it's just to get people to adopt a behavior as a precautionary measure and they don't believe the severity threat is there. And finally, we looked at the influencing factors for our research questions using correlations, all of which came out to be statistically significant. The percent likelihood participants claimed they had to catch the flu was positively correlated with the number of times they were sick in the last 6 months. So they thought they were more likely to get sick again. The health consciousness index was negatively correlated with the severity index. So they monitored their health more, so they perceived the threat to be less risky because they could identify it early or take care of it. And the severity index was positively correlated with vulnerability. So the more severe they saw the flu, the more vulnerable they felt to catching it. These showed a few things. First, the last test showed the importance of self-efficacy. These showed the importance of portraying fear and severity and vulnerability in a message to get from one stage to the other to fill all parts of protection motivation theory. And it shows the need to segment and analyze your audience before a health campaign. So you could address those that are very high in the health consciousness. You could address those who have been sick a lot in the past. You could address those that feel extremely vulnerable. Different target messages to go with the beliefs that they have about catching the flu. So there were a few limits to this study. We did use just a student population that probably had limited experience making health choices for themselves, but it did give us a population generalizable to a larger college population. And like we said before, time was also a limit between pre-test and post-test. More time might have helped them go through the stages or provide answers in the post-test that didn't necessarily support what they remembered saying on the pre-test, but it could have also influenced decay in message memory, so they might not have remembered what the message about the flu shot said. So more testing would be needed on that. So that leads us to a few different directions for future research. First would be doing a similar experiment, but also following up at the end of flu season to see how many people carried flu through to get the flu shot. Because while intention's great, it's actual behavior change that is the goal of protection motivation theory. Also should do research like Hauser and his colleagues did in 2007 on the type of message and the channel of dissemination, whether messages are satirical or educational or humorous, whether they reach different groups best through video or on a message board or posted in a hallway at school. That shows the need for audience segmentation as well. And then finally, I think it'd be great to bring in the fourth component of protection motivation theory that this didn't touch on, which is response efficacy. So do college students think that getting the flu shot is going to work in the first place? Because if they don't, then nothing you say will influence them to get the flu shot. So that component should be brought in to look at it theory as a whole. Thank you.